Hi, I'm Michelle Segrest, and this is the Factory of the Future podcast.
This podcast is inspired by my 3-volume book series on the evolution of modern manufacturing. Each episode features engaging conversations with game-changing experts discussing the processes and innovations that are changing the landscape of modern manufacturing. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes, and take just a couple of seconds to leave a review. And then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single episode. As it aims to become a top manufacturing hub, India is on the threshold of major reform. India is poised to rank among the top 3 manufacturing locations by the end of 2022 or 2023. If you are considering locating or moving your manufacturing operations to India, you should know that it boasts a large engineer and factory worker population, respectable intellectual property protections, and easy access to English-speaking managers and executives. The upcoming legal and tax reforms and significant manufacturing infrastructure investments will only add to this list of good reasons to manufacture in India. The cost to manufacture in India is often lower compared with other Asian manufacturing industries due to largely lower worker wages. And we're going to talk a little bit about that to get a clearer picture. India's factory wages are the lowest among Mexico, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, and China. In the pandemic-driven world with unforeseen economic variables, it is vital for factories in India to adapt to leading the drive and urgency to adapt artificial intelligence. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that too with today's guest. Siddhant Bery is with us, and he is the CEO of KSP Inc. This is a prominent manufacturing and export company based out of Noida, India. The company focuses on a diverse portfolio ranging from bird feeders, metal, lawn and garden decor, fireplace accessories, and tools to home storage products. Started in 1987, the brand always stayed ahead of the competition through an innovative approach and through its adaptability. Passion, vision, versatility, strong people skills, and determination to lead and succeed are what defines the new age entrepreneur, Siddhant Bery, who with his innovative ideas and entrepreneurial zeal has become an epitome of accomplishment. Being a disruptive and ardent entrepreneur, Sid has been blazing the trail and continues to scale even greater heights in the realm of metal fabrication. Sid, who joined KSP Inc. in 2019, brought with him a new perspective on running the firm by effectively utilizing global best practices. Sid is always on the lookout for new business possibilities, and he saw that the company's profitability was dependent on the expansion and growth of exports. The pioneer, together with his father, was critical in creating a strong global footprint and growing the international market. Owing to his relentless efforts and commitment, the firm has grown by 50 to 60% in the previous 2 years, making it India's second biggest exporter of metal fabrication. KSP Inc. boasts an impressive line of clients, including Walmart, Lowe's, Tesco, Sainsbury's, and Staples from the United States, Denmark, Germany, Sweden, Canada, France, and Australia. Sid's ambition is to make KSP Inc. the world's leading manufacturing business by attaining sustainable and ongoing growth via the application of technology and innovation, since he thinks that technology and innovation are at the heart of all organizations. He plans to revive his home storage goods business because he believes there is a significant opportunity in the untapped market. In the coming years, he plans to concentrate his efforts and time to catering to and expanding this business. Well, I can't wait to have this conversation. So let's welcome Sid to the podcast. Hi, Sid. How are you today?
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for having me on the podcast. And that's a wonderful introduction. And
Yes, it was a long introduction, and we have a lot to talk about. So I'm
yes,
very happy that
definitely.
you're here. I'm so happy that you're here. And even though that was a long introduction, maybe you can start by just telling us
a little bit more about yourself and your background in manufacturing and kind of what brought you to KSP, and then also a little bit more about KSP's capabilities.
Yes, of course. So the funny part is I have no manufacturing background. I was an investment banker for 4 years before I joined my family business, which is metal fabrication and the export of metal fabricated items to Europe, the US, and to other parts of the world. So a lot of youth entrepreneurs who join the family businesses, and most of them which are manufacturing businesses present in India, are mostly top line driven. That is, they come in and they just want to drive the sales. But what actually a manufacturing company is about is having proper efficiency, having zero wastages, and having a clean supply chain, which a lot of Indian businesses fail to understand. So when I joined my family business, instead of working from top down to a bottom approach, I had a bottom up approach to the business. I tried changing systems, implementing a new ERP system, and implementing efficiencies that would reduce the cost of manufacturing. Because I have a simple statement that if your bottom line is strong, no matter how much you go the top line, the bottom line has to stay the strongest. So that's one reason. And now I'll give you a little bit of brief about KSP. KSP is a metal fabricating export house that is in India. It's located around half an hour drive from Delhi, which is the capital of India. And we have four operational units, which is spread across say 110,000 square feet, and we employ around 1,100 to 1,200 people. We are one of the few factories in India which has a Walmart green audit, so we are very sustainable in and we follow best practices. And we will be supplying in 5 or 6 product categories to different nations. That is home storage, bird feeding, lawn and garden decor, fire tools and accessories, kitchen storage, and other storage facilities. So the idea to come and talk to you on this podcast is to make people understand why India is the next manufacturing hub, and why people should invest in India, and why people should look at Indian factories as a global supply partners.
Yes, I think that's very important. It's a great topic to discuss. And I've actually been covering India manufacturing for several years now. There's another big manufacturing company there, RIL. I'm sure you're familiar with them,
Yes,
Reliance Industries Limited. And they are just on the cutting edge of things that are going on in manufacturing. Although it's a different industry than you're in,
yes.
it's there's a lot to be learned by some of this cutting edge technology and automation. So what? But it's been a couple of years since I've talked to those guys, and even back in I would say 2018, they were doing really innovative things. So overall, what would you think say is the current state of manufacturing in India? Is it
So what I,
growing? Is it where it needs to be? Or yeah, what's the state of manufacturing?
what I would say right now is India is what China was 10 years ago.
Ah,
So
okay.
that makes it the most advantageous thing for us right now is the low cost labor force that we have. India's manufacturing labor force is one of the lowest in the world. I think it's approximately $1.50 per hour. So that makes it rather cheap. The second important division that is there is the demographic division that is there in India. So we have a high number of youth population, that is the age of 18 to 28, 30. That gives us a lot of youth labor and youth hands to carry out work. So comparing us to a Chinese manufacturing company where the labor rates are so high, which makes it a lot more suitable for us to have simple manufacturing process taking place in India. The third thing that I would like to say is obviously there's a youth population that is there in the economy, which has suddenly they have a higher disposable income, which is there. So that is suddenly creating a upward demand in the economy, which is also making a lot more manufacturing companies come into India to service that demand. Now you have to understand we have a billion people in our country. So amongst a billion people, if the per capita income of the people is increasing over time, there's a lot more quantitative demand in the economy. To service this quantitative demand, there have to be goods that have remanufactured. So that's why what I see that uh, India's manufacturing is around 2% of the world GDP, and within the next 10 to 15 years, I see that number to increase. Another important aspect that I see is the government has been rather supportive in the past couple of years and supporting Indian manufacturing. They've carried out wonderful tax reforms. So now the corporate tax rate, which is there for any Indian manufacturing company or which a foreign company or any other company or an FDI that tries to come to invest into Indian manufacturing, the tax rates have been reduced to 17%. And one more thing, if you compare India to other developing economies, which is like Brazil, Russia, India, China, getting credit, solving insolvency issues, getting IP patents, and getting trading done is a lot more feasible. And this this is also an advantage which has been there. The rupee value has been falling against the dollar over the past couple of years. So exports have been more favorable out of India. But then, however, I always say that with a lot of these factors, a technology plays a big role when it comes to manufacturing. So the application of technology in different manufacturing plants that is taking place is also very feasible that is taking place in India.
Yeah, you're giving us a lot to unpack here. So let's backtrack a minute and explore some of these individual topics. So first, tell me a little bit more about this lower workforce rate, because when people in the United States hear that, they think child labor. And they think, bad working conditions and, cheap slave labor. And so, can you correct that misconception or defunk that myth a little bit?
Of course, I can. So if you see now, if I compare the labor rates that are there between all the countries, now you have to see the power of money that is there in different countries. Each rupee has a different value in India, and a dollar has a different value in America. So the per capita spending of an individual person, it makes a difference with the currency that you hold. Now, what I say is in terms of child labor and ethics. So any company, especially if I come back to my company, we are audited by Walmart, by Lowe's, by Home Depot. To talk about the American companies, then Tesco and Sainsbury in Europe and UK. So the idea behind these audits is that they check in the factories if the working conditions are okay, if there's no child labor taking place in the country or in the factory. I mean, or is there proper sanitization, proper food given to the workers? And there's also local government authorities that are carrying out regular inspections in the factories. And if the factory fails to meet the legal requirement, or fails to be compliant with any of these measures, then what the government takes strict action, and there's strict fines that are imposed on the factories. And forever, the factories that are looking to be global players out of India, they have to be compliant according to the legal requirements that are there, that are given by the other companies. So I think seeing that ahead, and moreover that you see that the people who are now taking over the factories are mostly second generation or generation entrepreneurs. So they have a more of a global outlook when it comes to reviewing a factory or handling the operations. So automatically, you could say that there has been a massive reduction if I compare around 10 to 20 years ago to now in terms of exploitation and child labor and other malpractices that were taking place in factories.
Okay, good. I appreciate you clearing that up, because I know that some of the listeners were probably going to respond to that. When they hear low wages, they automatically have this negative connotation. But in fact, it's just one of the advantages of Indian manufacturing. And also, the skilled labor is really high there. In India, the engineers, the skilled workers and trades are very advanced, and I know this because a lot of United States manufacturers go to India to recruit talent, and so I know that's very high there. So, what are Indian manufacturers doing to keep that talent close to home?
So obviously now there has been a lot of educational reforms that have taken place in the country that have allowed this talent pool to emerge in the economy. There is cheap access, or I would not say cheap, there is low cost access to educational loans. There is a lot of government support given to vocational training, and there is also a lot of government programs that are there to provide this educational base to people who cannot afford it or who cannot have access to it. So this idea that has been there in the country has created this talent pool. The idea behind the talent pool is for us companies which are there in India to utilize it. So what a lot of people have been doing is there is this big campaign which is going around in India called the Make in India campaign. So there is a lot of government benefit, a lot of taxation benefit that is given to companies that are manufacturing in India. And now what we also see is that the growth of Indian manufacturing companies is a lot higher than the growth of manufacturing companies that are there in the US or in EU. That is basically because of the cost of manufacturing is a lot lower. Now, if you look at the per capita cost of manufacturing compared to the US compared to India, it is almost there's a vast difference, around the 60 to 70% in some items. So that what an individual sees before going to the US is as an engineer or as a quality manager or something. It's just the growth that is available in India is tenfold in comparison to the growth that is available in the US companies. Now, and moreover, I would like to say is that a lot of people have started feeling a lot of nationalism with the nation itself. They see it to be an emerging economy, and the benefit of that is that when you feel that, then you want to stay back in the country and add some productivity and add some gross product to your own country itself. So that is a big motivation that's making people stay back.
Okay, good to know. In the intro, we talked a little bit about artificial intelligence. And so I want to cover that, give it its due, because we are talking about the factory of the future on this podcast. So, how is AI and other automation and other innovations playing major roles in manufacturing in India?
Of course. So before we go into that topic, I just want to make it clear that every factory, according to me, has a technological cycle that takes place. So there's 4 stages of maturity that takes place between the factories. So some factories in India are digital champions, some are digital followers, some are digital innovators, and some are digital novices. So I would say around 1% of the factories or 2% of the factories in India are digital champions. So what these factories are usually doing, they have a clear strategic position in the marketplace, in which they use AI to offer customer solutions, offer multi-level interactions, or these companies have implemented real-time end-to-end integration connectivity across all value chains from manufacturing to product to customer to external networks to delivery. The second and the third category, which I think, according to me, is where most Indian manufacturing companies are. They're either digital followers or digital innovators. So most of and out of that bracket, you'll see more of digital followers and digital innovators, because the digital followers that are there are those people who have internally integrated some parts of their company with AI. Suppose say sourcing to manufacturing, which they closely collaborate, but they're not fully vertically integrated. The other one are the digital innovators. So these guys are doing a hit and try method. They're trying to get the digitalization in the company, so they have it part of in the supply chain. They have a smaller network of the ecosystem, and they're offering it probably in some part to in terms of customer service or some part of measuring productivity, but it's not fully integrated. And then there's some companies which are the digital novices who haven't tried any type of AI. Now, obviously, when it comes to AI, it really makes a difference in how successful you are implementing it. Yes, there are good benefits of AI, and then there are negative benefits on AI. So before a company implements AI, it first should recognize in which kind of technical logical cycle it is. Post that, it has to go through another review that it should do is to understand the culture that is in the company. So there are a lot of companies in India, which most manufacturing companies in India are family run. So they are fourth generation, fifth generation entrepreneurs that are there. So the new generation that's coming in with the thought process of the culture of implementing AI, then you have some old school managers or thought managers who are there who don't want to accept it. So it becomes difficult for the implementation to take place. So it's important for these companies to first understand which position they are in, then explain the benefit of implementing the technology into the company, and then slowly educating the workers, the staff, the team members, on what the benefit of this application would do. So, because you're collecting a large pool of data, when the data is not processed, is not created into some format which will add any value to your supply chain, it's not going to be of any value to you.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so knowing that as a base, what are some of the other types of automation that Indian manufacturers are incorporating into their overall automation landscape?
Okay, so the what's driving artificial intelligence, or what you would say factory of the future in India, is one is obviously the high revenue volatility that is there in the manufacturing companies. So to stabilize that, they do the implementation of AI. And the second reason for the implementation of AI, which is the main reason I would say, is the continuously to find cost savings. So obviously companies which are so competitive, they're looking for shorter production times, increased regulation and inspections, reduce the defection rates. Then they're looking at probably a more adaptability on the production floor, and more customization of the toolings. So through the process of implementation like this, then that is what they're looking at. The factory of the future, after implementing this, would be able to achieve a lot more. Now, if I take a simple example of how AI can play a value in your quality system, that is a simple process of defect detection. Now, today, if you see in India, many assembly lines have no systems or technologies in place to identify defects in the production line. So even which they have a very basic, probably they have a required skilled engineer who's just seeing the products definitely, and telling the difference between the functional and the defective parts. So obviously, this system cannot hold still, and cannot obviously obviously there is a higher amount of chances of finding a defect, but it's not a foolproof method that will find a defect in the process. So by again, now if I look at the application of AI, what can AI do over here? Artificial intelligence and self learning capabilities can always save the countless hours that we have a skilled worker standing there individually checking the parts that are producing false positives. So first of all, over here, both you're having quality control and you're reducing the rejection rate, which can be applied over here. Now, the second thing, if I want to talk about, is how again in the quality place, you can end up like processing algorithms. So these algorithms, which are there in companies, can validate whether the product has been perfectly produced from start to finish. And by doing this, you can understand by installing key points on the factory floor. So in the algorithm, you can have a certain seven check point that will automatically read that if the product is okay according to the 7 QC points that you have. If it has, then it will sort it automatically and move it ahead in real time. So that, according to me, can play a big role in your quality aspect of manufacturing. Now, obviously, there are other benefits also. Then you have a benefit of saying assembly line integration. So what you usually do is most manufacturers spend on the problem with Indian manufacturers is they have the data, but unfortunately they don't know how to process the data, which will give them information and trends that will give them how to put things nicely together. So for an operation, by using AI or using technology, or you can use an IoT connected equipment that can ensure that you get like a bandwidth view of the whole operation that is there. That is from the sourcing of the raw material to the amount, to the cost of the production, to the cost of packaging it, to the cost of dispatch from your factory, so that it really integrates your assembly line together. What happens in India is everything is usually moving by a skill-based worker on the assembly line. But then again, there is a cost factor that takes place into it. The cost factor is that is the technology cheaper, or is the skilled worker cheaper? That call the factory has to take itself. In certain places where I've done the calculation in my factory, sometimes the skilled worker tends to be cheaper than implementing the technology. But obviously, then you don't have 100% foolproof system, because at the end you're using humans versus you're using artificial intelligence.
Right. That's an interesting perspective that I haven't heard before. So you do have to kind of weigh that ROI when thinking about technology. We had a conversation earlier about how technology companies are typically developing technology for other tech companies rather than for manufacturing. This is a challenge right now. So what do we do about that? How can we address that challenge?
So the problem is that most of these what has happened in the current economic landscape, tech companies are the flavor of the town. So that is unheard of, and manufacturing companies have been perceived or have the perception in the marketplace of being old school in the production processes or in their or in the value addition tech can add to them. But now the idea that is there that tech companies can actually add a lot more value to manufacturing companies. So we do see a smaller spectrum of technology companies producing tech for manufacturing companies. But yes, if you go back to the drawing board, you have multiple softwares, multiple inventory software which are used by manufacturing companies, which are fully AI driven, such as SAP B1, you have HANA B1, and you have multifold inventory systems that are used by companies, which give you real time calculation of your stocks, real time inventory turnover ratios, real time stock aging, real time purchase to sale ratios, which is a lot benefit for a manufacturing company, because what we are seeing around the world is becoming a lot more globalized. So till you're as a manufacturing company, you're fighting for that particular cent. If you're fighting it for that particular cent, you need that AI in your company to understand the robotics. Now, a lot of companies are also using AI into the machinery. So you see a lot of tech companies producing the tech and then probably collaborating with the machine manufacturer to get that tech into the machine. So that's why how you have your robotic weldings develop. So what we see in our company, in the next step that I see at KSP, we've been using skilled workers are doing our internal welding. So we are probably going to invest in go into robotic welding, which increases our productive time and reduces the cycle time of different products. Because when you're working on a reduction in the cycle time, that means you have more operational time to use that opportunity time to produce something else at that particular time. So if I have an 8 hour workday, and out of an 8 hour workday, if my machine is producing X amount of goods for 8 hours, and I get a robot or robotic welding inside, and then that same thing does it say in 7 hours, so that gives me an opportunity cost of 1 hour to produce something else. So why not? So it depends on company to company and where you can get generative design or get the AI to add value to it.
Okay, makes perfect sense. All right. So, another topic or trend right now that a lot of manufacturers are talking about in the US and also in Europe is the effect that COVID has had on manufacturing. So, I'm wondering, how has the pandemic affected manufacturing in India, with regard to labor, migrant workers, production delays, supply and demand, et cetera? How is COVID having an effect?
Okay, that's a great question, and it's a good and big question. So I'll take each topic separately.
Okay.
So first, I'll talk about the labor. So when we had the first COVID wave in around last year, the Delta variant, when
Right.
as soon as started, there was a lot of fear in amongst the workers. So most of the workers that come to the cities to work in the factories are usually from, say, neighboring villages. So seeing the fear and the factories shut down with the government lockdowns, they did go back to their villages because of the fear.
Sure.
Now, when the factories reopened, there was this big scarcity of labor that was there amongst all the factories to actually get back the skilled workers. So obviously, most of the factory, at least I don't know about most of the factories, but what I'm saying, at least our factory, we paid all our wages to the workers even during the lockdowns, because what we feel that workers who have been there for you in the most happy times and the most productive times for your factory, they do deserve to be supported during difficult times. So out of for us, they are family to us. So for me, I feel responsible when I go to work every day that I'm putting food on the table for 1,100 people.
Yeah.
So if I'm not there for them at their worst time, I don't have any right to be there, and they don't have any right to be there with me during my best time.
I mean,
So
that's
we did have
sometimes the best business decisions are the ethical decisions that you make. So
correct,
it's really nice to
correct.
hear that.
Correct. So we did that, and I think that's why we, as a company, compared to other manufacturers, do not face problems in getting a labor force back, because
Hmm.
we created that relationship with our labor force. So we had most of our labor force back in 1 or 2 weeks of the lockdown.
But
Now,
how do you resolve that issue of fear? I mean, so you've kept the trust because you've been faithful to them and loyal to them and ethical in your business practices with your workers. But how they still must have fear, especially coming back a couple weeks later.
yes, of course, they have fear. So to remove the fear, what we did is obviously we took COVID measures in all our plants that we have. Obviously, there were temperature checks at every entry point of the factory. The factory was sanitized every 3 hours. Moreover, face masks and face shields were given to everyone. There was good 6 feet or 5 feet distance kept between every individual. So what we felt is that if we had happy workers in our company who are not fearing, the productivity rate would be a lot higher. So by giving them that comfort level and giving them that comfort zone, we were able to work our normal production cycles in most of our factories. But I do know of factories that were not ethical at that point, did not pay salaries, did not pay. They did face the brunt of it. Now it's a quid pro quo. It's who you supporting in your organization and who will support you on the back end. If you are able to support your company and your people, they will be there for you. So that is one logic that we have. But now, as you see over time, with this, when the second lockdown took place, that fear had gone away, because as people got known that COVID is not that, the variant had reduced over time. The longevity of the variant, or you could say the strength of the variant, had reduced. So people started taking it a lot lighter. The government started easing things. So the labor force was more comfortable with that, and that I think is an important thing. Now, if I go back to material, which
Yes,
was main issue I think everyone is faced in the world,
sure.
uh, with the first lockdown, there was no oxygen that was there in India, because most of the oxygen that was getting used in the hospitals. So the
Right.
oxygen that is required by the steel manufacturers, if I'm taking my example, because we're into metal fabrication, there was no oxygen for steel production to take place. So if there was no oxygen for steel production to take place, there was a vacuum in the supply that was taking place to us. So what basically happened is that that vacuum that was created between the demand and supply that was taking place made the steel manufacturers increase prices. So what happened was that was one cause of the increase in the prices. That was in the raw material. Then you saw over time that the freight companies had also reduced the number of ships that were going around the world.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that increase in freight rate and lesser export of our steel and lesser import of steel that was taking place also led to a major increase in steel prices. I think in the past year, I think we've seen a 70-75% increase in steel prices.
Yeah,
That
that's
is that
big.
has been there,
Yeah. I mean, the
and
supply demand is a really big issue, particularly with supply chain. And I hear this all the time from other manufacturers talking about how difficult it is to get parts and components from overseas, whether depending on, overseas can mean a lot of different things. I'm not talking only about import to the US. I'm talking about
yes,
import and export among all the countries. So how has it been in India, that issue?
that issue has been there. Like for us, like since we're an export company, we're facing a lot of issues in getting our containers to ship goods in. So there was a time in my company when I was holding 60 or 65 full 40-foot containers which were stocked in my warehouse, and there were no containers available to ship the goods to to my business partners in Europe or in the US. Now what happened is, when I got the containers, the shipments reached them late over there. They missed their deliveries to their customers. So, in a situation when I was overstocked for this 6 months, they become overstocked for the current period that is there. So the constant, there has been a longevity in the velocity of the movement of the goods that is taken place. So that has caused a lot of issues for both retailers, which are the big box retailers such as Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot. It has caused problem to the importers because they are sitting on so much stock, and it has caused problems to us because of their stock. Our quantitative demand has fallen a little bit. But I just realized that this is not only the factor. Now you see the Russia-Ukraine war is another factor that caused
Sure.
the
Of course.
which caused another increase in the material rates. And that has, and since Russia supplies most of the gas and most of the oil that is there to European countries, it has seen that there's been a major surge in electricity rates and major consumable rates in the European nations. So the disposable income that is available to the European market has reduced because the cost of living has increased, which is directly impacting the retail space, because a
Mhm.
person does not have that much disposable income to spend on retail goods that more. So what I realize is that this business cycle that is there with the freights and the material and the war, it has been a double whammy impact on all manufacturers at every time. So, what we as manufacturers are all going back to the drawing board and seeing where can we actually make our company a lot more efficient. What we are targeting as KSP is to work on 1.5% wastage across all our factories. So that is what we are aiming at. So from the start of a manufacturing process to our powder coating to our packaging, at every level we have installed this new software called the SAP. We are measuring the production cost at every level. So we cannot afford any more leakages in the production process. So to control these wastages, I get daily reports from my system. So from zero, that is the incoming of the raw material, till the finishing, I'm actually able to measure the labor cost at every level. So it has come to measuring everything at a more micro level than earlier when we used to see everything at a macro level. But I guess it's giving us a more holistic picture of our whole operations and giving us multiple dashboards to monitor everything, which is making it a lot more easier.
Right. And that's another reason automation is so important, because that kind of monitoring really comes into play when you have these challenges that you didn't expect, like a pandemic or like a war, a world war breaking out. So it's really interesting to see how companies respond to those external challenges that happen that you don't expect. There's really no playbook for that. I mean, now we have a playbook for the next pandemic, I guess, but it's you have to be nimble, I guess, as a company to respond to outside factors like that.
Yeah, I'm sure that I think all manufacturers in the past 2 years have learned what they didn't learn in the past 35 years.
Exactly.
So
I'm hearing that a lot. That's been a big theme on this podcast, and I hear it from also clients that I have and people that I interview and talk to all over the world. So I think that's something that everyone's having to deal with. But it's important to talk about it because other manufacturers can learn from what you're doing, and you can learn from what other manufacturers are doing. So it's a nice conversation to have.
no, definitely, and this I think this opportunity that is available to us, especially to all manufacturers, actually gives them time to come back on the drawing board and see where technology can now actually be applied to the manufacturing process. Because now what has become, first you have skyrocketing material rates, you have skyrocketing freight rates, you have lack of availability of containers, you have
Right.
lack of ability of import. So really you need to have that tightened supply chain. To have that tightened supply chain, you really need that technology. So your intelligence or IoT ecosystem with the wealth of data can give you a variety of automations and permutations and combinations to give the best production function that has need to be carried out to make you to that profitable function that is there. So it is very important to manufacturers to implement that IoT ecosystem that will measure the production function that will be profitable for you. So when many you'll see over time with COVID and stuff, you'll see a lot of equipment operators are also showing high signs of fatigue only because they've been impacted with COVID. Now, when you see that, you're seeing a little bit a slack of productivity because a lot of productivity is directly dependent on the health, how healthy your workers are. So that also gives us a really important factor to reorganize our activities, reorganize our operations, and go down and sit down with our technology, design algorithms, and come back with this permutation solution that create those alternatives. So when you have the time to do that right now, this is the best time to implement it.
Yeah, good advice. As you know, the theme of this podcast is the factory of the future, and so I'm curious to know, from your perspective, what does the factory of the future look like?
So the factory of the future in India, I
Sure,
will
yeah,
focus on that. Yeah.
absolutely, of course.
So the of the future in India, where I see is if I go back again to my stages of digital maturity, which I was talking about, is in the next 10 years for all factories not become digital champions because that is the dream. That is when every single stage of a factory is integrated from the start of the production process till the product is dispatched from a factory, completely IoT based or AI based. But what I expect a lot of factories with the current economic scenario and the push in the different volatility of demands that is taking place, to be digital followers or be digital innovators. So
Yeah.
you'll have couple of the factories who will set the trend of the innovation that is taking place amongst the factories, and you'll have a lot of them following. But what I see is the ones who are following the innovators are actually also getting motivated to take that step ahead to follow. You have to have certain factories who take the big step to innovate, and they do the dirty work of trying and testing what is working, what is not working, what worked really well. An AI implementation could be a complete failure also. It depends on the implementation. And the digital followers are just one step behind them, saying, okay, fine, this big boy, say, like you said, RIL has integrated this particular
Right.
artificial intelligence, which is reducing the volatility of my stock that is taking place, or the velocity of my stock that is rotating. Okay, I like this. Let me implement this in my factory, but at a smaller scale.
Right.
So you'll see a lot of people following through with the digital space. Now, if you do not do that, you will not be competitive, and you will burn out over time. So you do have to take advantage of the economies of scale. The economies of scale can only be taken advantage of by the implementation of IoT and artificial intelligence in your business. If you're not doing that, you will burn out. Your economic curve of your factory, your production functions, your profitability functions, your cost functions is all dampened, and you don't want that to happen. Because you see the neighboring countries also are also cashing up to India. Now you see Bangladesh, it has a high level of textile exports that are taking place from it, was unheard of for the past 5 years. Vietnam is booming. Then after that, then you have India. So we do companies in India to be competitive have to do that. So the faster they do it, the more competitive they will be, the more profitable they will be. But then it really depends on one single thing: it's a culture in the company. The culture backs the technology, you will move fast through. If the culture in the company does not back the technology, no matter even if you get the CEO of Microsoft to implement the technology, it will not happen.
We hear this all the time. I don't think that's only for India manufacturing. We talk about culture, company culture all the time. And, there's a famous quote by Peter Drucker who says that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And
Yes, it does.
I've always loved that quote, and we hear that from everybody. It doesn't matter what country you're in, what continent you're on, what type of manufacturing that you're doing, what type of industry you're in. We are constantly hearing that culture matters and that it's super important to focus on that. So thank you for making that point again. Once again, it's always nice to kind of verify other people's comments about different things. So as we're wrapping up, Sid, I want to first thank you for being here, but I also want to give you an opportunity to give us the last word. Tell us anything else, maybe anything that we didn't, a topic that we didn't have a chance to cover that you want to talk about, or anything else about your company you want to say. I'm just going to give you a chance to wrap things up with your final comments.
No, I just want to say that manufacture for me, for young entrepreneurs who have joined their manufacturing businesses, who are looking to start manufacturing businesses, I think this is the most interesting time for your learning curve to move ahead for two three reasons. Because when a person is put in a difficult situation, you start using parts of your cognitive brain which you've never used before. And we've been stranded from both ends as manufacturers. Once we've been stranded from the pandemic, then you've been
Mm-hmm.
stranded from the war, and you're trying to be a global supplier to the world. So you really have to get back to the drawing board. Now, getting back to the drawing board really means to really look at three important factors. Now, what a lot of companies that do is that they're not willing to adapt. You have to adapt to pursue anything in the future, and the only way that you will adapt is by implementing technology. Technology is the driving force for today's manufacturing companies. Now, if you're able to adapt technology, and nobody's saying start from zero and go straight to thousand. By it always happens at every different stage of a manufacturing process. Now, the idea behind that is that we as Indian manufacturers pride ourselves in our manufacturing. We want to produce the best quality goods. We want to produce at the lowest cost. We have the best profit functions. But the idea of doing all of that can only take place when you sit back on the drawing board and realize, yes, I need to get some technology into the company. Now, if you see, I would say there is a large portion of the companies which are in the tier one cities of India which are implementing technology. But if you go down to some of the basic manufacturing companies which are there in the tier two or tier three cities, you will not see that much technology invested into the companies. What I really want to see in the Indian manufacturing space is that historically speaking, we do have the hands, we do have a billion people who are ready to work. So let's make India as a country the next manufacturing hub what China was. And to do that, we have to be driven to implementing the technology and making Indian manufacturing, like you say, the global factory of the world. So that's what I want to finish with.
Fantastic. That's a great way to end it. Sid, thank you so much for being here and for sharing all your knowledge and bringing to light all these different topics that are important to manufacturing in India. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
Of course. This brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. If you have interesting information to share and want to contact me about being a guest on a future episode of this podcast, please send me an email at michelle@navigatecontent.com. You can also send me questions that I will have my expert guests answer for you on a future episode. And in the meantime, please check out my book series on modern manufacturing to read more than 30 real-world case studies about how global companies are using smart technology and innovation to build the factory of the future. All the links to the books and articles mentioned in this podcast are in the show notes. Have a great week, and please join me for the next episode of Factory of the Future.